Okay, today I'm reading the Tribulation Force. This is the second book in the Left Behind series. And today I'll be reading chapter 6, and I will begin to read now. Before I get into that, Carpathia said, stalling, a maddening trait of his that never failed to annoy Buck. Let me just reflect on something. Do you remember when I assured you that I could make a problem go away for you? Did Buck remember? Up to the day of the murders, it has been his most chilling look at Carpathia. An informant of Buck's, a Welshman with whom he had gone to college, had turned up dead after getting too close to an international banking scheme involving his own boss, Joshua Todd Cawthron, head of the London Exchange. Buck had flown to England to investigate with a Scotland Yard friend, only to be nearly killed himself when the Yard agent died in a car bombing. Buck determined that what had been ruled a suicide of his Welsh friend had actually been a homicide, and Buck had had to escape Britain under a phony name. When he got back to New York, none other than Nikolai Carpathia promised him that if Todd Cawthron had been involved in anything underhanded, Carpathia himself would take care of it. Not too long after, Todd Cawthron died before Buck's eyes at Carpathia's hand in a double murder that only Buck seemed to recall. I remember, Buck said flatly, the understatement of his life. I made clear that I would not tolerate insincerity or deviousness in my administration of the UN, and the Todd Cawthron situation took care of itself, did it not? Took care of itself. Buck remained silent. Do you believe in luck, Mr. Williams? No. You do not believe that luck comes to those who do the right things? No. I do. I always have. Oh, the occasional bummer or even criminal gets lucky once in a while. But usually, the better someone does his job, the luckier he seems to be. You follow? No. Let me simplify. You were in dire danger. People around you were dying. I told you I would take care of that. And yet, obviously, I could have nothing personally to do with it. I confess that when I so boldly assured you that I could make your problems go away, I was not sure how I would affect that. Not being a religious person, I have to say that in this case, good karma was with me. Would you not agree? Oh, to be perfectly honest with you, sir, I have no idea what you're saying. And you wonder why I like you so much? Carpathia smiled broadly. You are a person I need. What I am saying is that you and I both had a problem. You were on someone's hit list, and I had two people in my trust who were involved in serious crimes. By committing suicide and killing Todd Cawthron in the process, my old friend Jonathan Stonical took care of the problem we both had. That is good karma, if I understand my Eastern friends. So while you say you're grieving over the deaths of your friends, in reality, you're glad they're both dead. Carpathia sat back, looking impressed. Precisely. Glad for your sake. I grieve their loss. They are old friends and once trusted advisors, even mentors. But when they went bad, I was going to have to do something about it. And make no mistake, I would have. But Jonathan did it for me. Imagine that, Buck said. Carpathia's eyes bored into him as he seemed to examine Buck's mind. I never cease to be amazed, Nikolai continued, at how quickly things change. I can't argue with that. Not a month ago, I served in the Romanian Senate. The next minute, I was president of the country, and an hour later, I became Secretary General of the United Nations. Buck smiled at Carpathia's attempt at hyperbole, and yet his accent to power had seemed almost that fast. Buck's smile faded when Carpathia added, It is almost enough to make an atheist believe in God. But you ascribe it to good karma, Buck said. Frankly, Carpathia said, it merely humbles me. In many ways, it does seem this has been my destiny, but I never would have dreamed it or imagined it, let alone planned it. I have sought no office since I ran for the Romanian Senate, and yet this has been thrust upon me. I can do nothing less than give it my all, and hope I act in a manner worthy of the trust that has been placed in me. A month earlier, Buck would have cursed the man to his face. He wondered if his sentiment showed. Apparently it did not. Buck, Carpathia continued, I need you, and this time I am not going to take no for an answer. Well, Rayford clicked off his cell phone after talking with Bruce Barnes. Rayford had asked if he could come a few minutes early that night to show Bruce something, but he did not tell him what it was. He pulled the note from Hattie from his breast pocket and spread it across the steering wheel. What in the world did it mean? And how did she, or obviously her boss, know where to find him? His cell phone chirped. He pushed a button and spoke into the speaker embedded in the visor in front of him. Ray Steele, he said. Daddy, have you been on the phone? Yeah, why? Earl's been trying to reach you. What's up? I don't know. Sounds serious, though. I told him you were on the way home, and he was surprised. He said nothing about nobody ever keeping him informed. He said something about nobody ever keeping him informed about anything. He thought you were coming back from Dallas later, and so did I. Anyway, he had been hoping to catch you at O'Hara before you left. I'll call him. See you tonight. I'm going to go a little early to talk with Bruce. You can come with me and wait in the outer office, or we can take two cars. Yeah, right, Dad. I'm so sure I'll wait in the outer office and have to face Buck alone. I don't think so. You go ahead. I'll be a few minutes late. Oh, Chloe, don't start, Dad. Buck felt bold, curious, but bold. Certainly he wanted to hear what Carpathia had in mind, but it seemed the man was most impressed when Buck spoke his mind. Buck wasn't ready to tell him all that he knew and what he really thought, and he probably never would, but he felt he owed it to himself to speak up now. I probably shouldn't have come without knowing what you wanted, Buck said. I almost didn't. I took my time getting back to Steve. Oh, let us be frank and serious, Carpathia said. I am a diplomat, and I am sincere. You must know me well enough by now to know that. He paused as if waiting for Buck to assure him it was true. Buck did not even nod. But come, come. You do not apologize or explain why you ignored my last invitation. And yet I hold no grudge. You could not have afforded to snub me again. I couldn't? What would have happened to me? Perhaps it would have gotten back to Stanton Bailey again, and you would have been demoted even further or fired. Disgraced either way. I am not naive, Buck. I know the origin of your nickname, and it is part of what I admire so much about you. But you cannot keep bucking me. It is not that I consider myself anything special, but the world and the news media do. People ignore me at their peril. So I would be afraid of you, and that's why I should look favorably on whatever role you're about to offer me. Oh no, afraid of ignoring me, yes, but only for the obvious, practical reasons I just outlined. But that fear should motivate you only to come when I ask and provide your way. It should never be the basis on which you decide to work with me. It will not take fear to persuade you on that score. Buck wanted to ask what it would take, but it was clear that was what Nikolai wanted him to ask. So he again said nothing. What is the old phrase from the movies you Americans are so fond of? An offer you cannot refuse? That is what I have for you. Rayford, I hate to do this to you, but we've got to talk face to face and this afternoon. Earl, I'm almost home. I'm sorry, I wouldn't ask you if it wasn't important. What's up? If I could tell you over the phone, I wouldn't be apologizing about insisting on the face to face, would I? You want me to head back there right now? Yes, and I'm sorry. There are laws and there are rules, Carpathia was saying. Laws I obey, rules I do not mind ignoring if I can justify it. For instance, in your country, you are not allowed to bring your own food into a sporting arena. Something about wanting to keep all the concession money for management. Fine, I can see why they would have such a rule, and if I were the owner, I would probably try to enforce the same. But I would not consider it a criminal act to smuggle in my own snack. You follow me? I guess. There's a rule that pertains to heads of states and official bodies, like the United Nations. It is understood that only in a repressive dictatorship would the ruler have any ownership or financial interest in a major news media outlet. Absolutely. But is it a law? In the United States, it is, but internationally, not uniformly. There you go. Carpathia clearly wanted Buck to ask where he was going, but Buck would not. You are fond of the term bottom line, Nikolai said. I have heard you use it. I know what it means. The bottom line here is that I am going to purchase major media and I want you to be part of it. Part of what? Part of the management team. I will become sole owner of the great newspapers of the world, the television networks, the wire services. You may run for me any one of those you wish. The Secretary General of the UN owning major media? How could you ever possibly justify that? If laws need to be changed, they will change. If ever the time was right to have a positive influence on the media, Buck, it is now. Do you not agree? I do not. Millions have vanished. People are scared. They are tired of war, tired of bloodshed, tired of chaos. They need to know that peace is within our grasp. The response to my plan to disarm the world has been met with almost unanimous favor. Not by the American militia movement. Bless them, Carpathia said, smiling. If we accomplish what I have proposed, do you really think a bunch of zealots running around in the woods wearing fatigues and shooting off pop guns will be a threat to the global community? Buck, I am merely responding to the heartfelt wishes of the decent citizens of the world. Of course, there will still be bad apples, and I would never forbid the news media to give them fair coverage. But I do this with the purest of motives. I do not need money. I have a sea of money. The UN is that flush? Buck, let me tell you something that few others know. And because I trust you, I know you will keep my confidence. Jonathan Stonigal named me the sole beneficiary of his estate. Buck could not hide his surprise. That Carpathia might be named in the multimillionaire's will would have shocked no one. But sole beneficiary? That meant Carpathia now owned the major banks and financial institutions in the world. But his family, Buck managed. I have already settled out of court with them. They pledged to keep silence and never again contest the will, and they get $100 million each. That would silence me, Buck said. But how much did they sacrifice by not getting their fair share? Carpathia smiled. And you wonder why I admire you. You know that Jonathan was the wealthiest man in history. To him, money was simply a commodity. He did not even carry a wallet. In his own charming way, he was frugal. He would let a lesser man pick up a dinner check and in the next breath buy a company for hundreds of millions. It was just numbers to him. And what will it be for you? Buck, I say this from the bottom of my heart. What this tremendous resource gives me is the opportunity to achieve my lifelong dream. I want peace. I want global disarmament. I want the peoples of the world to live as one. The world should have seen itself as one village as soon as air travel and satellite communications brought us all together decades ago. But it took the vanishings, which may have been the best thing that ever happened to this planet, to finally bring us together. When I speak, I am heard and seen nearly all over the world. I am not interested in personal wealth, Nikolai continued. My history proves that. I know the value of money. I do not mind using it as a form of persuasion, if it is what motivates a person. But all I care about is mankind. Buck was sick to his stomach and his mind was flooded with images. Carpathia staged Stonikal's suicide and manufactured more witnesses than any court would ever need. Now was a man trying to impress him with his altruism, his largesse. Buck's mind flew to Chicago, and he suddenly missed Chloe. What was this? Something in him longed to simply talk with her. Of all the times for it to become crystal clear that he did not want to be just friends, this was the worst. Was it merely Carpathia's shocking admission that made him long for something or someone comfortable and safe? There was a purity, a freshness about Chloe. How had he mistaken his feelings for her as mere fascination with a younger woman? Carpathia stared at him. Buck, you will never tell a living soul what I have told you today. No one must ever know. You will work for me, and you will enjoy privileges and opportunities beyond your imagination. You will think about it, but you will say yes in the end. Buck fought to keep his mind on Chloe. He admired her father, and he was developing a deep bond with Bruce Barnes, a person with whom he would never have had anything in common before becoming a follower of Christ. But Chloe was the object of his attention, and he realized that God had planted these thoughts to help him resist the hypnotic, persuasive power of Nikolai Carpathia. Did he love Chloe still? He couldn't say. He hardly knew her. Was he attracted to her? Of course. Did he want to date her, to begin a relationship with her? Absolutely. Buck, if you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be? Buck heard the question and stalled, pursing his lips to appear to be thinking about it. All he could think of was Chloe. What would she think if she knew this? Here he sat as the most talked about man in the world offered him a blank check, and all he could think about was a 20-year-old college dropout from Chicago. Where, Buck? I'm living there now, Buck said. Chicago? Chicago. In truth, he suddenly couldn't imagine living apart from Chloe. Her body language and responses the last couple of days told him he had alienated her somehow, but he had to believe it was not too late to turn that around. When he showed interest, she had too. When he gave an unclear signal, she did too. He would clarify his interests and hope for the best. There were still serious questions to consider, but for now all he knew was that he missed her terribly. Why would anyone want to live in Chicago? Carpathia asked. I know the airport is central, but what else does it offer? I am asking you to expand your horizons, Buck. Think Washington, London, Paris, Rome, New Babylon. You have lived here for years, and you know it is the capital of the world, at least until we relocate our headquarters. You asked me where I would like to live? If I could live anywhere, Buck said. Frankly, I could live anywhere. With wireless internet, I can file a story from the North Pole. I did not choose Chicago, but now I would not want to leave there. What if I offered you millions to relocate? Buck shrugged and chuckled. You have a corner on the wealth of the world, and you say you are not motivated by money. Well, I have very little, and I am truly not motivated by it. What motivates you? Buck prayed quickly and silently. God, Christ, salvation, the tribulation, love, friends, lost souls, the Bible, learning, preparing for the glorious appearing, New Hope Village Church, Chloe. Those were the things that motivated him. But could he say that? Should he? God, give me the words. I am motivated by truth and justice, Buck said flatly. Ah, and the American way, Carpathia said, just like Superman. More like Clark Kent, Buck said. I'm just a reporter for a great metropolitan weekly. All right, you want to live in Chicago? What would you like to do if you could do anything you wanted? Suddenly, Buck snapped back to reality. He wished he could retreat to his private thoughts of Chloe, but he felt the pressure of the clock. This trip, strange as it had been worth the grief just for the morsel about Carpathia's inheritance from Stonical. He didn't like sparring with Nikolai, and he worried about the minefield represented by this latest question. Anything I wanted? I suppose I used to see myself one day in a publisher's role, when I'm a little long in the tooth to be running all over the world chasing down stories. It would have been fun to have a great team of talented people and assign them, coach them, and put together a publication that showcased their abilities. I'd miss the legwork, though, the research, the interviewing, and the writing. What if you could do both? Have the authority and the staff and the publication, and also give yourself some of the best assignments? I suppose that would have been the ultimate. Buck, before I tell you how I can make that happen, tell me why you talk about your dreams in the past tense, as if you no longer have them. Buck had not been careful. When he had relied on God for an answer, he had been given one. When he ventured out on his own, he had slipped. He knew the world had only 7 more years, once the treaty was signed between Carpathia and Israel. I guess I just wonder how long this old world has, Buck said. We're still digging out from the devastation of the disappearances and Buck, you insult me. We are closer to world peace now than we have been in 100 years. My humble proposals have found such receptive ears that I believe we are about to usher in an almost utopian global society. Trust me, stay with me, join me. You can fulfill all your dreams. You are not motivated by money? Good, neither am I. Let me offer you resources that will allow you to never think or worry about money again. I can offer you a position, a publication, a staff, a headquarters, and even a retreat that will allow you to do all you ever wanted to do and even live in Chicago. Carpathia paused as he always did, waiting for Buck to bite, and Buck bit. This I've got to hear, he said. Excuse me one moment, Buck, Carpathia said, and he buzzed Hattie. Apparently, he signaled her in a different way than usual because rather than answering on the intercom, she appeared at the door behind Buck. He turned to acknowledge her, and she winked at him. Miss Durham, Carpathia said, would you inform Dr. Rosenzweig, Mr. Plank, and President Fitzhugh that I am running a bit behind schedule? I am estimating 10 more minutes here. Another 10 with Chaim and Steve, and then we will be in Washington by 5. Very good, sir. Rayford parked at O'Hara and hurried through the terminal to the Underground Control Center and Earl Holliday's office. Earl had been his chief pilot for years, and Rayford had grown from being one of the best young pilots to one of his veteran stars. Rayford felt fortunate to be at the place now where he and Earl could speak in shorthand, cutting through the bureaucratic red tape and getting to the heart of matters. Earl was waiting outside his office door and looking at his watch when Rayford approached. Good, Earl said. Come on in. Nice to see you too, Rayford said, tucking his cap under his arm as he sat. Earl sat in the only other chair in his cluttered office, the one behind his desk. We got a problem, he began. Thanks for easing into it, Rayford said. Did Edwards write me up for, what did you call it, proselytizing? That's only one part of the problem. If it wasn't for that, I'd be sitting here giving you some incredible news, such as, first, tell me if I misunderstood you. When I first came down on you about talking about God on the job, you said you had to think about it. I said if you'd just assure me you'd back off, I'd make the write-up for Edwards go away, right? Right. Now, when you agreed to do Dallas today to recertified, shouldn't I have been able to assume that meant you were going to play ball? Not entirely. And I suppose you're wondering how my research went. I already know how it went, Ray, Earl snapped. Now answer my question. Are you saying you went down there to get your papers on the 777 and all while you had no intentions of backing off from sounding so religious on the job? I didn't say that. Say what you mean then, Ray. You've never played games with me, and I'm too old for this. You hit me with all that church and rapture stuff, and I was polite, wasn't I? A little too polite. But I took it as a friend, just like you listen to me when I brag about my kids, right? I wasn't bragging about anything. No, but you were excited about it. You found something that gave you comfort and helped explain your losses. And I say, great, whatever makes your boat float. You started pressing me about coming to church and reading my Bible and all that. And I told you kindly, I hoped that I considered that personal and that I would appreciate it if you'd laid off. And I did, though I still pray for you. Well, hey, thanks. I also told you to watch it on the job, but no, you were still too new to it, still flushed with the novelty of it, high as a guy who's just found the latest get-rich-quick scheme. So what do? You start pushing Nick Edwards, of all people. He's a comer, Ray, and people in high places here like him. I like him too. That's why I care about him and his future. Yeah, all right, but he made it pretty clear he didn't want to hear any more, just like I did. You let up on me, so why couldn't you let up on him? I thought I did. You thought you did? Earl pulled a file from his drawer and fingered his way to a certain page. Then you deny telling him, and I quote, I don't care what you think of me. That's a little out of context, but no, I wouldn't deny the spirit of that. All I was saying was that. I know what you were saying, Ray. All right, because you said it to me, too. I told you I didn't want to see you become one of these wild-eyed fanatics who thinks he's better than everybody else and tries to get him saved. You said you just cared about me, which I appreciate, but I said you were getting close to losing my respect. And I said I didn't care. Well, can't you see how insulting that is? Earl, how can I insult you when I care enough about your eternal soul to risk our friendship? I told Nick the same thing I told you, that what people feel about me isn't that important anymore. Part of me still cares, sure. Nobody wants to be seen as a fool. But if I don't tell you about Christ just because I'm worried about what you'd all think of me, what kind of friend should I be? Earl sighed and shook his head, staring at the file again. So you contend that Nick took you out of context, but everything you just said is right here in this report. It is? It is. Rayford cocked his head. What do you know about that? He heard me. He got the point. He certainly must not have agreed with the point. Otherwise, why this? Earl shut the folder and slapped it. Earl, I was right where you and Nick are the night before the disappearances. I've heard all this, Earl said. I'm just saying I understand your position. I was almost estranged from my wife because I thought she had become a fanatic. You told me. But my point now is that she had become a fanatic. She was right. She was proven right. Rayford, if you want to preach, why don't you get out of aviation and into the ministry? Are you firing me? I hope I don't have to. Do you want me to apologize to Nicky? Tell him I realized I pushed him too far, but that my intentions were good? I wish it was that easy. Isn't that what you offered the other day? Yes, and I upheld my end of the bargain. I have not copied this file to personnel or to my supervisors, and I told Nicky I wouldn't. I said I would keep it, that it would become a permanent part of my personal file on you as my subordinate, which means nothing. Of course, you and I know that, and Nicky is no dummy either, but it seemed to satisfy him. I assume that you're going to Dallas for research, was your way of telling me you heard what I was saying and that we were helping each other out. Rayford nodded. I had planned to be more judicious and try to be sure I didn't get you into trouble defending me for my actions. I didn't mind doing this, Ray. You're worth it. But you turned around and pulled the same stunt this morning. What were you thinking? Rayford flinched and sat back. He set his hat on the desk and held out both hands, palms up. This morning? What are you talking about? I thought it went well. Perfect, in fact. Didn't I pass? Earl leaned across the desk and scowled. You didn't pull the same thing with your examiner this morning that you've pulled with me and Nick and every other first officer you've worked with for the past few weeks? Talk to him about God, you mean? Yes. No. In fact, I felt a little guilty about it. I said hardly anything to him. He was pretty severe, giving me the usual prattle about what he was and wasn't there for. You didn't preach at him? Rayford shook his head, trying to remember if he had done or said anything that could be misconstrued. No, I didn't hide my Bible. Usually it's in my flight bag, but I had it out when I first met him because I'd been reading it in the van. Hey, are you sure this complaint didn't come from the van driver? He saw me reading and asked about it, and we discussed what had happened. Your usual, Rayford nodded. But I didn't get any negative reaction from him. Neither did I. This complaint comes from your examiner. I don't understand it, Rayford said. You believe me, don't you, Earl? I wish I did, Earl said. Now don't give me that look. I know we've been friends a long time, and I never once thought you lied to me. Remember that time you voluntarily grounded yourself because you didn't think your flight was going out and you'd had a few drinks? I even offered to pay for another pilot. I know, but what I'm supposed to think now, Ray? You said you didn't hassle this guy. I want to believe you, but you've done it to me and to Nick and to others. I got to think you did it this morning, too. Well, I'm going to have to talk with this guy, Rayford said. No, you're not. What? I can't confront my accuser? Earl, I didn't say a word to the man about God. I wish I had, especially if I'm going to have to take grief for it. I want to know why he said that. It had to be a misunderstanding, some secondhand complaint from the van driver. But like I said, I didn't sense any resistance from him. He must have said something to the examiner, though. Otherwise, where would that examiner even get the idea that I've done this before, unless the Bible just set him off? I can't imagine the van driver having any contact with the examiner. Why would he, Ray? I'm at a loss, Earl. I'm not sure. I would have apologized if I had legitimately been in trouble for this, so I sure can't apologize for something I didn't do. Buck recalled Rosenzweig telling him how the president had offered to come to New York to meet with Carpathia, but out of his vast humility, Nikolai had insisted on going to Washington. Now Carpathia casually has his personal assistant send word that he'll be late. Had he planned this? Was he systematically letting everyone know where they stood with him? A few minutes later, Hattie knocked and entered. Mr. Secretary General, she said, President Fitzhugh is sending Air Force One for you. Oh, tell him that will not be necessary, Carpathia said. Sir, he said it's already in the air and that you should come at your leisure. The pilot will let the White House know when you're on your way. Thank you, Miss Durham, Carpathia said, and to Buck, what a nice man you have met him. Buck nodded. My first Newsmaker of the Year subject. His first or second time winning? His second, Buck marveled, anew at the encyclopedic memory of the man. Was there any doubt who the subject of this year's Newsmaker would be? It was an assignment Buck did not relish. Earl shifted nervously. Well, let me tell you, this comes at the worst possible time. The new Air Force One, which is scheduled to go into service next week, is a 777. Rayford was nonplussed. The note from Hattie Durham saying the same thing was still in his pocket. And that is the end of chapter 6. And next we'll be reading chapter 7. I hope you enjoyed it. Enjoy your day. Thank you for coming, and you're free to go.